The summer after I graduated middle school, I developed a passion for photography, but back then, phones with good cameras weren't common. I was only 15, so I didn't exactly have the funds to purchase a nice camera. So I did extra chores and saved up all my pocket money from odd jobs over the summer. Then one day, I spotted a listing on Craigslist for a slightly used camera for $250 that normally cost $800. Great, I had just enough. It seemed in good condition and there weren't any faults mentioned, so I decided to contact the owner. He was a middle-aged man named Jackson and confirmed that the camera hadn't been sold yet. I didn't want to risk missing this opportunity, so I asked him when I could come over to check out the camera and seal the deal. He said he was home that day, as it was a weekend. I had originally planned to go with a friend, but he was grounded, so I ended up going alone. So I took out my bike and left for his place. He lived about 2 miles from my town. I followed the address he gave me and found that a dirt road was the only way to get there. There were fields all around, so I guessed he was one of those people who had settled for the quiet rural life. It was getting dark and I was starting to get a little worried. The whole thing looked a little suspicious. The low price, the shady location. I should have turned around right then. But my dumb teenage ambition really wanted that camera. I blamed myself for overthinking everything and moved forward. His house was old but well built. I made my way to the front porch and knocked on the door since, of course, there was no doorbell. After a moment, I heard sturdy footsteps approaching and the man answered the door. Jackson didn't smile and held a poker face. He greeted me with a nod and said, "Right this way." He led me to the living room where he showed me the camera. It looked as good as new, and I couldn't get why he was selling it at such a low price. Maybe it had a broken part inside or something. I asked him if I could take a picture and check, and he nodded yes. And then he offered to take a photo of me to test out the camera. It sounded weird, but I thought it would be rude to refuse, so I went ahead and let him. I stood still, waiting for my picture to be taken. There was a flash and a shutter sound, and he looked at the result and said, "Wow. You're a handsome boy." The comment left me feeling very uncomfortable. He smiled for the first time, and he showed me the picture. It was a good one, I admit. I took out the $250 and handed him the money. He pocketed it with a thanks, without even counting it. I put the camera in its bag and hung it on my shoulder. He asked me if I'd like a cup of hot cocoa, as he had just made some. I politely refused, however, he kept pressing. I didn't know why. Was he lonely or something? Maybe he just wanted company for a few minutes. I politely told him that a glass of water will do. He seemed delighted as he went into the kitchen to fetch it. He came back with it. This time, one of his hands was behind his back. Okay, I'd seen enough and decided to run out the door. I heard the sound of a glass dropping and breaking, and he yelled, "Wait!" I didn't wait, or stop, or look back. I hopped on my bike and rode it as fast as I could. I went home and thought it over. I didn't know what he had in his hand behind his back. Perhaps I was overthinking, but at least I got the camera. I took it out and began checking it out. I only snapped just a few pictures, but afterwards the camera said, "Memory full." That was weird. Maybe the guy had forgotten to clear its memory. I checked the images and my hands began to shake as I looked at them. There were rows after rows of images of people standing uncomfortably at the same spot that he'd taken my picture. The sight of it made me sick. I put the camera away and called 911. When the police came by to investigate, they ran the pictures through their system. They discovered that the pictures in the camera were of people that went missing around the area, many of them my age. I gave the cops the address, and they arrested the guy that very day. He didn't even appeal it. They found incriminating evidence in his house, and it was game over for him. Last I heard, they were able to find many of the missing people from the photos, and they locked the guy up for a pretty long time. That was the last time I used Craigslist. I still shudder, thinking how close I was to being just a picture in his camera. When I moved to the city, I was determined to start fresh. but the rents were sky high, and as I had just gotten a new job, I couldn't afford it. It barely covered my expenses, let alone a place to stay. Finding a roommate through Craigslist seemed like a practical solution, so I eagerly scrolled through the listings. After a few dead ends, I stumbled upon a post that caught my attention. A cozy apartment in a convenient location, and the rent was surprisingly affordable. The best part was it was 10 minutes away from my workplace, and it was furnished. With a glimmer of hope, I reached out to the person behind the ad, praying he hadn't already found someone else. Fortunately, he hadn't. We exchanged messages discussing our preferences and lifestyles. He seemed to be friendly, so I decided I'd go through with it. We agreed to meet at the apartment. It was everything that I hoped it would be. The guy, who called himself Ryan, greeted me with a warm smile, and we hit it off instantly. I was eager to move in and start this new chapter of my life. At first, everything seemed perfect. Ryan and I shared meals, watched movies, and even explored the city together. We became fast friends, and I felt fortunate to have found such a compatible roommate. But as the days passed, I began to notice some things. The first thing was the unusual purchases to my credit card. Sure, I had a lot of subscriptions, but none of it could amount to how much I was charged. It was really weird. I kept calling the bank to reverse them. When Ryan came home, he found me worried and asked me what was wrong. When I told him, he told me of his personal experiences of his bank info getting stolen through untrusted websites. I believed it was my own fault for not having a firewall on my computer. The bank reversed some of the larger payments, and I downloaded a Windows Defender app. For a few days, everything was good, but then one morning I woke up to a message of an ATM withdrawal of a large amount. I immediately panicked and began to rummage through my drawer, my wallet, everything to find my card, but it was nowhere in sight. And then it all just clicked. The reasonable apartment, the unauthorized transactions, everything. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization settled in. How could I have been so blind? Ryan, the guy I trusted as my roommate and my friend, was the one stealing from me all along. I marched angrily to Ryan's room and threw open the door, expecting to find him there. But his bed was empty, untouched, not a single thing in sight. It was strange because he usually had stuff scattered around. That's when it hit me like a lightning bolt. I dashed back to my room, and sure enough, my ID, my passport, even my Apple Watch was gone, vanished into thin air. I decided to track him down using the information he'd given me. Guess what? He'd lied about his name too. The real Ryan, the guy who actually owned the apartment, was on a vacation and coming back soon. It was all a crazy mess. The police tried their best to find the sneaky thief, but he seems to have disappeared without a trace. I wasted no time in canceling my cards and getting a new ID, but the financial damage was something I'd struggled with for a long time. It was a real punch in the gut. Even today, I don't use sites like Craigslist. I'd rather find stuff the old school way instead of risk being a victim again. I've always had a passion for writing, which was the reason I opted to earn my living through freelancing. But lately, work's been slow. Bills were piling up and I was running out of options. It was then that one of my friends suggested I take a look on Craigslist. Desperate to find work, I took his advice and turned to the platform. As I was scrolling through the job listings, a post caught my eye. It was titled, "Ghostwriter Wanted, Unusual Stories." The description offered to pay above the market rate for each story. Intrigued, I clicked on the ad to learn more. The listing was mysterious, with minimal details about the employer or the nature of the stories I'd be writing. For a moment, I was suspicious if it was a scam or not, yet something about it called to me. With mixed emotions, I decided to send an email expressing my interest in the job. To my surprise, I received an instant reply from the employer, who went solely by the name of Mr. Blackwood. He explained that the stories I'd be ghostwriting would be unique and based on true crime events. He also mentioned that I'd have to write very gory scenarios. Maybe that's why the job paid so well. Even though I'd written in horror and thriller genres before, for some reason, an unease crept over me. However, the promise of a good payment won me over, and I agreed to sign the NDA and the contract. The next day, he gave me the plot of the first story. It was even more gory than I'd anticipated. We spoke over the phone as he gave me the details. It felt so real, as if he possessed first-hand experience of the crime. The story revolved around a young girl who gets murdered by a serial killer and slices her up like a pizza. I almost threw up writing it, but my bills weren't going to pay themselves, so I hung in there. Thankfully, he was absolutely delighted by the story and asked me if I enjoyed writing it. I lied and said that I did. Then he said something along the lines of, "Imagine how much fun the serial killer had." I was stunned, but then he said, "Just kidding." I went about my day. The next morning, I sat down with my daily paper and morning coffee. I wasn't really a fan of reading the news, but I was just checking to see if my submission to the paper had been accepted. What greeted me on the front page was a breaking story about a brutal murder the previous night. It was described vividly, as vivid as I had written it the previous day. The murder victim was sliced open like a pizza. The details were all too on point to just be a coincidence. Just then, I got a call. I saw that it was my employer. At first, I decided not to answer him, then thought about making him confess. He asked me if I'd seen the papers. I told him I did. He asked me what I thought about it, and I expressed my surprise at the coincidence. He told me that it wasn't a coincidence, but that the victim lived across the street from him. Her neighbors were the first to find out before it could be published in the papers. That's why he made me write it so well, because he wanted it to remain in writing. I believed him, because I didn't think he'd be stupid enough to make me write his crime. That very day, he requested for me to write a story about a man who gets his skull cracked open and acid poured into it. My hands shook as I wrote it, and a feeling of dread consumed me. It's as if I knew what was coming, but I took a leap of faith. Sure enough, the next day I opened to find the same murder in the papers. The lines between fiction and reality were already blurring. I decided to report it to the police immediately, and an investigation opened up. However, it backfired, and they got a warrant to search my place instead. They found the stories I wrote for him and immediately arrested me. I tried to tell them it was Mr. Blackwood and not me who killed those people, but no one believed me. I told them to track his number, found out that it had been out of service for a long time. Well, the police eventually found the truth behind how everything happened. The doctor at the hospital diagnosed me with split personality disorder. No one believes me, but I know Mr. Blackwood is just as real as I am. Now I just need to serve my time before I can get out and find him.